aqui a vossa atenção, então. We are ending this conference. We proceed with the last two talks. The next speaker is also the organizer of this conference, José Ricardo Carvalheiro. He's professor at the Communication and Arts Department here in the University of Beira-Interior. At Platform Research Unit, he currently coordinates the project Public and Private in Mobile Communication, and he's the responsible for this event. His main research interests are in media history, cultural identities, and migration. He also has recently coordinated the project Media Reception and Memory, Female Audiences in the New State. Professor José Ricardo Carvalheiro will present the communication Privatism Against Privacy, Technology and Culture of Mobile Communication.
Hello, thank you for listening to me. First thing to say is about the English. I have to read because I have not English good enough to improvise. Even what is written was not revised by a native speaker, so we will have mistakes, grammar problems, etc. So I apologize for that. The second point is this is not a closed text; it's more a working paper going through data collected in the project that is being analyzed now, and I intended to, instead of looking to the border between public and private, to explore the relation between two concepts on the one side of the border, which is privatism and privacy. But of course this implies mentioning the public, because we cannot talk about one thing without the other. The dichotomy is two sides of the same coin. We take privacy as a communicational concept eminently, as far as it depends on the notion of audience. Richard Sennett defined private situations as the ones where one controls the audience by knowing its members. We take privacy as the aim and or the practice of keeping personal affairs restricted, not accessible to unknown people. This implies communication of such topics to be bounded to known receivers or participants to keep control over the audience. Privatism is a concept that encompasses a number of declinations. Habermas coined the notion of civic privatism, which he referred also to as familial vocational privatism. Familial orientation with developed interest in consumption and leisure on the one hand, and in career orientation suitable to status competition on the other, quoting Habermas. The concept has further been employed to name declining engagement in organizations that link individuals to the public sphere, or disengagement in public discussion and deliberation. The emphasis on forms of sociability develops a different sense of the term privatism as an alleged retreat into a more private world of family, work, and friends, as social privatism. The concept of network privatism has been used and challenged in the work of Scott Campbell, who contends that there is lack of evidence to support the idea that mobile media have the effect of producing private bubbles. Thus, while privacy inside the public-private dichotomy is basically opposed to the public in the sense of openness in the communicative processes, privatism is mainly opposed to the public in the sense of collective issues and political involvement. But it can also focus on networks of sociality and even on cultural values and attitudes, as in the idea of orientation to family, leisure, consumption. Then privatism is a three-sided concept involving social attitudes, the utmost valorization of personal affairs, family, friendship, etc. Communication content focused on the personal experience and personal relationships of kinship and or friendship, and also sociability, which is circles focused on personal ties. The European Social Survey has pointed that throughout Europe, personal aspects are evaluated by people as the most important in life, comparing with civic involvement. In Portugal, in a score between 0 and 10, family has the highest score, above 9 points, followed by friends, job and leisure, 8 and 7 points. Politics is at the bottom of the list, 3 points. Volunteering and religion score not so low, but scarcely past the middle of the scale. The rates are similar in all European countries. Privatism in this sense is a culture, and a dominant one, but sure, it does not mean that all that is valued all the time is the private realm and the personal ties. Rather, there seems to be increasing forms of mixing, as in the emergence of personalized forms of large-scale political mobilization, like the ones mentioned by Lance Bennett, who coined the concept of personalized politics in this sense, in which individuals activate their networks of personal contacts. So the research question here is if the combination between privatism and mobile media can be detrimental for privacy. I will pass some slides with some data, some codes from interviews and focus group. I will not read them to save time, but it functions more as examples or illustrations. Apart from moments of large political mobilization, the research we conducted in Portugal indicates that it is not a question of individuals choosing either a civic utilization or a privatistic use of mobile media in their daily lives. In common circumstances, most people use such devices to commute, for example, between leisure and news. Among Portuguese owners of a smartphone, 79% say they use it for leisure activities, games, music, videos, etc. And 77% declare they use it to consume news. And there is a high correlation between the frequencies of use for leisure and for news in smartphones. People who access news on the smartphone generally also use it for leisure. And those whose frequency is high in one of these uses also tend to make a frequent use of mobile for the other purpose. A scarce percentage of people use it just for one of these activities. Having said this, it should also be underlined that leisure is the most salient utilization of smartphones among Portuguese owners. If we take news as a sign of orientation towards public issues, we have a first clue here that smartphones are significantly used by people under 45 for public engagement through the consumption of information, but also that it is surpassed by other practices, potentially more oriented to privatistic worldviews. Mobile media potential for public involvement cannot be approached merely at the level of news consumption. For other, more active public practices may be enhanced with smartphones. In general, rates of online social networking have a remarkable proximity with the ones about entertainment, but the activity of sharing news items through smartphones is practiced just by a small part of those who use it for online networking. The most generalized use of smartphones, apart from phone calls and instant messages, is for taking photographs or videos. 94% of owners do it, 49% makes to a daily basis. Trying to know more about activities done through online social networking, we conducted a couple of issue-specific surveys, plus a number of focus groups and individual interviews. Such surveys suggest that younger people are significantly more predisposed to share personal interests than older ones, and also a masculine tendency for less care with consequences of personal exposure comparing to feminine attitudes. In a survey about the use of images, a vast majority declares to share photos in social network sites. Answers about the motivations for such a display of images online suggest that the impulse for interaction, mostly with family and friends, surpasses the worries about risks that nevertheless may be perceived or suspected. In interviews and focus group, these practices are reported also from those who do not assume the salience of sharing personal behaviors online, suggesting a powerful cultural atmosphere in their social circles. Like these codes where people don't assume the importance for them of collecting those snapshots and sharing them, or the people around them doing it all the time. Among teenagers, the use of smartphones is easily assumed to include a salient and sometimes compulsive centrality of personal information flowing through social networks. Through social network sites, which are both consumed and fed, as in the following quotes from a feminine focus group with ages between 17 and 19, where social network sites like Facebook and Instagram are salient. And there are some examples about the kind of information and images that they deal with. Although sometimes reluctantly admitted, examples of images posted online by young adults include similar contents: family, friends, pets, holidays, cultural events, or everyday situations, which are used for densification of ties within closed circles. In discussing the issue, adult participants in a focus group, ages between 24 and 39 and 38, and those are people highly educated, these participants underlie the difference between them and teenagers at the beginning of this dialogue. But they end up reporting practices of personal display as common as that among other adults. And they are very understandable about these practices on one side, although they criticize the risks that are implicit on these practices. So the impulse to disclose personal data ends up being understandable in a context that values privatism, a perspective of personal life as the possible locus of pride and happiness, where it seems natural, albeit potentially dangerous, not to refrain its desire of publicity. So that's about privatism. Before we turn explicitly to questions of privacy, we may reflect theoretically upon the uses of mobile media in terms of technology and culture. It was James Katz and Mark Acus who invoked the concept of Apparatgeist in order to refer to the spirit pervading the technological contexts inhabited by mobile telephony. And this cultural atmosphere produced in the social appropriation of the device is, according to the authors, the culture of connectivity, a logic of what they also call perpetual contact. The influential analysis by Katz and Acus naturally underlines the character of mobile phones as communication tools, but apart from their salient feature as connective apparatus, mobile digital media have also become powerful and extremely flexible means for what, inspired by George Simmel, we might name as the objectification of culture, everyday life culture. In his famous approach to culture, Simmel sustained there is always a dialectic tension between life and form, subjective and objective manifestations of human activities, both being needed for cultural expressivity and individual improvement. What is specific about modernity, according to Simmel, is a loss of reciprocity between life and form, an excess of objective culture tends to shorten the room for subjectivity, which in turn intensifies its expression as a defense mechanism, without nevertheless being able to re-establish the objects a character of positive extension of the self. It's not our aim here to discuss whether the enormous proliferation of symbolic forms made by mobile prosumers is a new chance in the development of subjectivity and reflexivity or just another advance in a modern imbalance favoring objective culture. We just wish to note how this turns an array of both daily practices and exceptional occasions literally into objects, and thus something able to be seen, stored, circulated, and commented. In fact, mobile devices with multiple functions allow users to perform, articulate, and mix many different symbolic objects, and they connect people perpetually also through them. And we also wish to notice that when the most prized social values are those of family, friends, leisure, consumption, a vast stuff of objective culture turns out to be privatistic technocrafts. For these reasons, we may see mobile digital media as a privileged technological resource for privatism and a condition for its collective network manifestation. A century ago, Zero, along with other social theorists, represented a line of thought which, without being technophobic, reflected on the nature of technological developments in critical ways. Today, new technologies of communication tend to be presented to us as non-problematic, as a natural result of evolution. But technologies are cultural forms, to quote Raymond Williams, not only in the sense that they are appropriated according to cultural contexts and thus submitted to different uses in different places by different people, but also in the sense that the technological developments are there and their outcomes in the form of practical devices are themselves cultural and political, and not just a consequence of science or just depending on findings. Williams coined precisely the notion of mobile privatization to point to vast transformations in capitalist industrial society in a way that matched mobility with an increasing centrality of private spaces and experiences. Today, an understanding of the new reconfigurations of public and private should not exempt us of paying attention to the dynamics of capitalist economy and to which values are embedded in emerging technologies. Quoting, the fate of information in the typically American world is to become something which can be bought or sold. This is a quote written in 1950, not by some anti-capitalist leader, but by Norbert Wiener, the founder of cybernetics. Broadcast media, as noticed by Williams, can disseminate contents through private spaces if the technology provided for reception orients audiences for domestic consumption. But broadcast media was still dependent on public information. They could only exist by the diffusion of content which appealed to large numbers of people. Even the much noticed trend towards privatization of public sphere by stories of personal drama or focus on mundane lives of celebrities, etc., can only be effective in broadcast media insofar as they get some collective resonance through example, identification, or discussion. Many contents in digital self-mass media, paraphrasing Castells, are private in a different sense from those personal stories we can watch in television, because they have no potential to become public in their repetition of millions of variations of self-displays. Nevertheless, this personal content can be very effective for social bonding, as Richling points, and this is the point here. They decisively have commercial value as information flows, precisely because they make up millions of symbolic objects flowing in a network structure. Contrary to the broadcast framework, being public or being personal is not a criterion for the information that flows in the networks of communication fed by digital mobile media. The commercial value of this content is enhanced for corporations because it not only has no production costs for them, but also because private people even pay in time and money to produce it themselves. Thus, technological development in communications is created to give people the means possible to be perpetual prosumers anytime and every place. It is not contradictory if people also use mobile digital media for public ends, accessing the news, civic discussion, etc. All this is information flows to be absorbed into the circuit of communication economic value, contributing for more demand of technology and increasing the centrality of new media technology in the late capitalist society. The public-private divide lost much of its significance from the viewpoint of corporations and the technological developments which are tied to them, but the economic value of personal cultural objectification is not fully achieved if such stuff is merely stored. It has to be given also the means of dissemination within groups, thus requiring devices to be simultaneously connective and performative. And as the public potential of personal information is low and its value increases as much as they reach larger groups, it asks for mechanisms of enlarging the circles where information circulates. Some social theorists have pointed to the primary elements of digital technology, its cybernetic basis as a science of control and feedback mechanisms. In mobile digital media, feedback is crucially used in two ways. On the one hand, it has been designed for alerting, informing about the other's reception, or whether their response or the absence of it, providing structures that stimulate answer, etc., in ways that engage participants in ever-evolving flows of communication. On the other hand, feedback provides commercial corporations and state organizations personal data from users and give them ability for monitoring tastes and actions of individuals. Some engagements in mobile digital communication today provide constant feedback of our personal actions, since every message is stored and processed, and there is where we should return to questions of privacy. And to our data. The folk idea that people, especially the youngsters, don't care anymore about keeping privacy, or that they lose the consciousness of what should be private, is contradicted by data we collected among Portuguese users. There are many signs that people in general go on managing the notion of privacy as something relevant for them, and that they have their tactics to deal with it. However, in the new technocultural landscape, they face conditions of great fluidity on the private-public dichotomy, and the cultural construction of certain dispositions that seem to be incorporated by users. For example, for the majority of Portuguese users of smartphones, applications apparently don't cause worries, and more than 2/3 of them already installed apps without even reading the permissions. However, this does not necessarily mean that people are not aware of risks for privacy, as in the following quote from the focus group. That perceptions of risk frequently are not coherent with strategies of protection is something our surveys tend to confirm. But they do not suggest that these perceptions are consistently lower in younger cohorts, neither that older users always act with greater care to protect their privacy. Our online survey focused on personal data indicates that a larger majority of smartphone users above 45 perceive a risk of losing control over their personal data compared with the respondents under 45. But the proportion of those who actively manage privacy settings, both in apps and in social network sites, is higher among the younger. A most sensitive field for privacy questions in users' perceptions is social network sites. The sources of concern here tend to be different according to age. For the older, problems arise mostly because they lack time or they find it difficult to manage privacy settings. Among the youngest, the most common reason is the very structure of the sites, which are designed to display and share data and thus require constant but variable cautions if users want to protect themselves. By the fact that mobile media are embedded in everyday life and are used at any moment to register and objectify a diversity of contents, they upgrade the risk of displaying personal matters. Moreover, when these are the most significant domains in users' lives. Some more examples of quotes linked to this topic. Degrees of concern also vary according to type of content in social network sites. The perceptions of risks for privacy are more connected to the use of images than to other kinds of information. But this is precisely a domain where many users don't put in practice strategies for protecting themselves accordingly. The fact is that respondents to the national survey declare that photos and videos are mostly used to gather images from family and personal experiences, confirming its salient privatistic use. But they also report that they share it within circles of known people, a practice that seems to match privatism and privacy and protecting them from publicity. Apart from those who often take and post images of private everyday life, also others who try to stay at the margins of this movement may finally conform to the collective dynamics generated both by the culture of privatism and by the structures of display and feedback technological embedded in platforms. Under such circumstances, definitions of privacy are under negotiation, and we can find different attitudes and practices related to mobile phones, even among teenagers. We identified at least 3 discourses among youngsters in Portugal. A discourse saying that to share personal content, and this is an example of that, a discourse saying that to share personal content in social media means to potentially abdicate of privacy because content is not theirs anymore and it gets out of control even though it is shared within known circles. Another discourse, which this is an example, says that privacy is due just for some personal aspects of their lives, but not for others. And this is very situational, very contextual, and is meaningfully thought about in each situation. Still another discourse applies the idea of private and the need for privacy strictly to contents that might imperil someone, information that can be actively used against if revealed. All the rest in this discourse may be explicitly termed by these teenagers as public, which means that it is something they don't mind being known or seen by anyone, whether it is personal or not. So, in this sense, personal and private are clearly different things. As I said, this is a working paper, it's not really conclusions, but just a few lines of final reasoning about if there is a combination between cultural forces for privatism and digital mobile media, which is detrimental for privacy. To the question if there is a new dynamics of objectifying and circulating symbolic forms which are personal, yeah, the answer is yes. But I'm not suggesting that everybody does it or that it is all people do all the time with mobile digital media or that they do it in the same way. To the question if it means a decrease of privacy, in the sense that people lose control over these objectified pieces of everyday life that circulate in social media, the answer is also yes. To the question if it is perceived by users as a decrease of privacy, the answer is nuanced, in as much as there are different uses and different attitudes and conceptions about what privacy is, as we saw among teenagers. In the social negotiation of what should be public and private, now this social negotiation now includes an upgrade in the commodification of moments, thoughts, snapshots, another Zeno's concept, of everyday life. And there corporations also are a powerful player, which play literally with the dichotomy. So the negotiation is not only among users, but includes also corporations, and that's all I have to say to you. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor, for this presentation with all this data collected in the project. Now the